So Doug, in a couple of the other videos we've talked about having sharp tools and the importance of having sharp tools, why it's easier to cut through the material. It means you have to use less force when cutting through the wood, which means less chance of accidentally pulling something into you or pushing something into somewhere it shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of that is, how do you keep things sharp? So I want you to just run through a few sharpening demos or a few tips for people.
There's loads of different ways of sharpening. You can have diamond stones, you can have water stones, you can have oil stones, you can hone something, you can sharpen something, you can grind something. There's all these different terms. Some of them mean the same thing, some of them mean different things. But the long and short of it is, if you make something that has an edge that comes to a defined point, it's sharp. Okay? So in the case of our axes that we've been using in the past few videos, there's lots of different ways that you can sharpen. Okay? So first of all, we have a normal, this is quite standard, this is a Carpenter's axe, a Hultafors Carpenter's axe. This is one of their Agdor range. Okay, and it is sharpened on a curve. So to exaggerate it, it's sharpened like that. So it's two curved faces meeting. Now the reason for that is because an axe is swung, it takes a lot of abuse at the edge. So if you have something that is that shape as opposed to that shape, it's wider behind the edge. So if you're swinging it, it means it's more robust. Okay, and the wider that cheek is, the curved bit sticking out, the stronger or more robust it is. Now for lots of my carving, I have quite fine blades. If you were using something for heavier cutting, you perhaps wouldn't grind it to as fine an edge. So that edge geometry is the standard geometry for an axe, but there's lots of other edge geometries out there as well. We have the full-on side axe. So what that means is that this side is ground perfectly flat, and this side is that same curved geometry. Now the reason for that is if you remove this cheek, you can hold it flat against something. Okay, with the standard geometry, if you hold it flat against something, the edge is just ever so slightly away. Hold it against something solid so you can actually see. The edge is ever so slightly away from the wood. Now you can quite see it there. Whereas with something like this that has a flat edge to it, it's against the wood. So if you want to make flat edges, something that's ground like that is a much better bet. However, that makes the edge a little bit more aggressive, and that can be to our advantage or disadvantage. So you can have things like this. This is a carving axe, and this has what they call an asymmetric grind. So it's ground back to, I don't know, 1.5 centimetres on this side, whereas on this side it's less. It's maybe only 1 centimetre in places on this side. And what that does is it makes it more aggressive. But these axes are handed. So this axe is right-handed, as is the big hewing axe. And if you wanted a left-handed one, the flat would be on the other side, because the idea is the flatter surface goes against the piece of wood as you carve. So that's number 2. And our final grind is a bit of an odd one, because it's not really an axe grind at all. This is really a knife grind. So this is a carving axe. I use it for a lot of my spoons and spatulas and stuff like that. And this actually has a flat grind, or a Scandinavian grind, or a zero grind, whatever you want to call it, whereas it's absolutely flat. Now for carving, that gives you a consistent edge at a consistent angle, so you can follow round things and it just makes life that much easier than having that cheek that kind of gets in the way and bounces you out of the wood almost. So we've got a carving axe which has got a flat grind. We've got a carving axe which has an asymmetric grind. We have a full-on side axe, which is as asymmetric as it can possibly get. And we've got our standard grind, which is the one we're going to do, and we're going to look at doing today. So, obviously this is my carpenter's axe, so that's already sharp. So, we'll have a look at this one. This one's a new axe, and you're sitting there going, why on earth is he going to sharpen a new axe? And the quick answer is the Hultafors Agdors range of their kind of cheap workday axes. They're not that cheap, but they're forged steel blades, but they do need just a little bit of work to make them sing properly. So as you can see, Richard looks closely with his camera here, you can see all the striations in the grind. Okay, so it's quite a rough grind all the way around here, yeah? And if you turn it over, I don't know if you can see it, but you can just see this stuff it's caught on the burr on the edge. So this hasn't quite been finished. Now that's not a bad thing. You know, in days past, all axes wouldn't have come completely finished. You'd have done all the finishing yourself, so the finishing was as you wanted it. That's no great disaster. Now, we've got lots of different ways of sharpening. I'm going to show you some of my preferred things and some of the things that I'm not so keen on. I quite like diamond stones. They sharpen quickly. These ones, I think they're available from places like Aldi, and they're really cheap. They don't last forever, but there's no point as a beginner particularly going out and buying really good, really fancy equipment, because until you learn how to use it properly, all that's going to happen if you buy those fancy water stones, they're going to have big dished bits in the middle where you haven't sharpened evenly and things like that. So I really would recommend starting out with the cheap stuff, and if you feel you need them, moving on to the more expensive water stones and stuff at a later date. Now this is quite coarse, so 200 grit, 300 grit, 400 grit and 600 grit on it. So I like to get a really nice shiny edge on all my axes. So I tend to go from the 600 grit on this to a 1200 grit, which is a piece of 3M abrasive stuck on a piece of MDF. And then I go to 2500, and then I have a piece of leather on here which I put some stropping paste on. That will give me a really nice mirror finish. A quick note on axe pucks. Axe pucks are lovely little things to pop in your bag. They're nice and light, but having said that, for the same weight as that, I think you'd get those definitely, if not that, because these are light as well. They're just a little bit more bulky. For me, the issue with the axe pucks is they're just awkward to hold. When I sharpen an axe, I tend to sharpen like this in circular motions. Now, because I'm holding the puck, I'm holding it very carefully, I'm keeping my fingers right back from the edge. There is a tendency with these to get closer and closer at the edge and grip them more, and sooner or later you just shave the tip of your finger off as you rotate, and it hurts like mad. So they're a good thing in that you can put them in your bag, you can carry them easily, they're relatively lightweight for what they are. But if you are going to go down this route, just be really careful of where your fingers are, because I know I've done it, nicked the tip of my finger, and I think a lot of other people have in the past as well. Okay.
Yeah, I use the Gransfors,
which has the nice
rubber
coat on the outside, but you still have that tendency to
want
to grip over the edge of the rubber.
It's something when we're teaching people, if we're using that as a method, it's something I always sort of looking over the shoulder, go, oh, no, just move your fingers back a little bit.
The beauty of using a bigger stone like this. And you know, there are plenty of places where you can get these that are just the thin little slabs. You know, you can hold right back from the edge, and in actual fact the only finger that's in front of the edge now is the one on the back that's pushing it forward a bit. I think it's much safer for your fingers.
And this is a case where technique is much more important than the materials used, because someone with good technique using cheaper materials to get a better result than someone using poor technique using a top of the range expensive stone.
Absolutely. Technique is key here. What you're trying to do is with each different abrasive, see, because this is a diamond stone, you can see the dust coming up already. You know, they do sharpen really quickly. Lots of people get quite frustrated with sharpening in that it takes them a long while to remove the material they're trying to remove. So diamond stones do have that advantage, but when you're a beginner as well, that can be a bit of a disadvantage, because you can take too much off when you get it wrong. Okay, now there's quite a lot to take away on this one, so I'm doing quite a lot of work with the rough grit on this. So what I'm doing is I'm starting with this pressed relatively flat against the cheek of the axe, and I'm slowly bringing it up like this until I'm sat on the edge of the axe and I'm actually sharpening the edge. The reason I'm doing that is we're trying to maintain this bevel. Okay, so we are wanting to sharpen away a layer of metal from all the way down that curve, from here all the way up to the edge. If we just sharpen the very edge and keep on sharpening just the very edge, what happens is when you sharpen the end off it, it does that.
Yeah.
And effectively what you're doing is you're making it blunter every time you sharpen it. So
you're reprofiling then.
You're reprofiling, you're changing the shape. So I'm starting rock right back, nice circular motion, I'm slowly raising the heel of my hand, sharpening the whole of that edge. So I'm not reprofiling it at all. Now, if you're looking at that now, you can still see the big grinder marks from the workshop that this was made in. But all the way down the edge, we can now see there's one mark there, so there's a little bit more work to be done on this end of it. So I would say that that side is largely done. So if we now compare that to the other side, you can now see the burr, the line of reflection all the way down the edge. Because I've ground a little bit more away, it's become much more obvious. Now I'm starting on a very coarse grit here with this, because this is the first time I've done anything with it. So starting, see how we've started at the back edge of the blade? You can see the bright strip along here now with the dust on it, and we're going to work our way forward by rolling. Now I'm already sharpening the edge, so the difference between the very sharp edge and rolling back isn't very far, but it's quite an important distinction to make. So, have we got all the way to the edge with the sharpening? Now I could keep on sharpening until all of these little marks were gone and I was going to end up with a complete mirror finish. Lots of people like their axes to be shiny and sharp and wonderful. For me, it's more about getting the most use out of it that I can.
Yeah.
And over a period of time, as I sharpen away at an axe, I will end up with that perfect shiny mirror edge. But this is the first time I've sharpened this, and I don't want to sharpen away loads of metal
No.
that I don't have to sharpen away. I feel it's a waste of time. I don't think it's a good use of my time, and my tool doesn't actually get any sharper at the edge.
No. And at the end of the day, it is a tool.
It is a tool.
If it does the job safely and does what you need it to do.
Yeah. So I've gone over that side now with a 200 grit. So this goes 2, 3, 4, 6. I tend to go 2, 4, 6, to be honest.
It's like slightly perversely, as the number gets higher.
As the number gets higher, the pieces of grit on the diamond stone are getting smaller.
So it's a 600,000th of an inch or something, isn't it?
It's something along those lines. It's like the number of grains that fit in a particular area or something. So if the number of grains is higher, they must be smaller to fit in.
So as long as you remember, the bigger the number, the smaller
the bigger the number,
the finer
the grit. So I mean, if you think about it, what you're actually doing when you're sharpening something is you're dragging lots of little pieces of grit through the edge. So if you have your 200 grit, this side, it's sharp, it comes to a point, but it's kind of like, if you looked at it really, really closely, it'd be almost like a sawtooth, because there's all these little bits of grit being dragged across it. So by getting smaller pieces and then sharpening away the marks left by the previous stone, you get something that the sawtooth is smaller and finer, and smaller and finer, and smaller and finer, and smaller and finer as you go up through the grits. And when you finally finish off on a leather strop or something, you end up with something where the pieces of grit that are doing the sharpening for you are so small that they're no longer visible to you, and you end up with something that has that beautiful mirror finish. So we'll carry on at 400 for a little while, and then we'll turn it over again. We've got a burr on the edge, and the burr is just a tiny little thin piece of metal right at the edge. And what happens is, as you sharpen, you create an area right at the very edge that's extremely thin, and that very, very thin piece, like a shaving, can kind of fold backwards and forwards like this as you sharpen. So you can see here, this is kind of stiffer down here, but the top bit folds backwards and forwards, and you get the same effect on a piece of metal. It's like thinner than foil, but that tiny, tiny thin piece, you can feel it's almost like a little barb or a little hook on the edge there. If you keep folding it backwards and forwards as you sharpen it, it work hardens. So it becomes a little bit stiffer and a bit harder, and you grind a bit more away, and it gets thinner and it starts to move again, so you work harden it again. And you get to the point where eventually what happens is, as you fold it backwards and forwards as you're stropping, it just comes away. Okay, but that'll happen kind of later on in the process as we get onto stropping. So really, we're onto the 600 grit now, and we're just trying to get rid of the marks left by the last sharpening process, which was the 400 grit. So we've done that side. As we go on, the first one that we did took quite a while to get rid of all those marks, because we had to grind away a good bit of metal. But now we can actually go through the grits quite quickly. Look now, that bird's certainly folded over. It's got those nice circular motions. So we're starting with our circular motions nice and flat, and we're slowly rocking them up to the front of the surface. So we folded our bevel over again, we folded our burr over again, not our bevel. And what we'll do just quickly to try and work harden that burr a little bit. We'll just go backwards and forwards a couple of times. Now, you can just see here, look, this is quite a big burr, this.
Oh.
Just see that burr starting to come away. That's actually a really big burr because I've done quite a lot of grinding on this to kind of get rid of those, as much of those marks as I could reasonably. You can just see it starting to peel away, the burr now. Now what I don't want to do is pull that off.
Yeah.
Because if I pull that off, I'm starting to...
You're going to end up with a step as well.
Going to end up with a step and a broken off bit and everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this. Now this is just a piece of 1200 grit abrasive, and it's on a piece of MDF. And MDF's just got a nice texture to it. There's a little bit of give in it.
So is that just bonded on with some contact adhesive or something like that?
A spray mount's my favourite thing for this kind of stuff, because you can peel it off and put the next one on. Okay, now the trick here is, you might notice, I'm grinding away from the edge now. I'm not doing a circular motion. This is only really a bit of paper with some grit on it. Okay, so if you were to do a circular thing, what you'd actually do is cut the surface. See that big chunk's disappeared now? That big chunk of burr, there's a little bit here now, right on the corner, and there's a good bit down here.
But now you can target it almost.
Almost. All I'm trying to do is that mirror finish bit is only really going to be the very, very edge. So I'm not kind of now doing the whole round and round thing up here. I'm not trying to polish it right back here. I'm only really now trying to polish the very edge bit that I'm going to use to cut with. And again, for me, the amount of material you're actually removing by doing this is minuscule. So I don't see the point in doing it all over. Looking at it now, I think most of that burr's come off with that actually, and that's the 1200 grit.
It should also be worth saying now, from personal experience as much as anything, that when you get to this stage it gets very exciting to see the very sharp edge develop, but you've just got to be very, very aware of that sharp edge and still maintain
absolutely
rules
you
of
can
safety.
See it again, you know, because I'm using these big blocks, really the only finger that should be passing the edge is this one on the opposite side. I'm sure as I've done this there'll have been odd passes where I wasn't quite as careful as I should have been.
I've cut myself doing sharpening demos probably more times than I have using a knife.
Yeah,
because you're talking to somebody whilst you're...
Now, we have actually still got a tiny little burr right on the edge, but it's much, much smaller than it was. So we've done some 1200 and we folded it back. You can see just starting to peel off there again, this tiny little burr right above my finger. You see that? So what I do now is, now I've done my 1200, I go up to 2500 now. Rock it the other way. Now a big point to make here is the consistency of your angle at this point is what matters. So if I'm sharpening like that and that's right on the edge, that's fab. If I do that, I'm not sharpening it at all. If I do that, I'm taking the edge off. Okay, so you've got to be really consistent.
You can almost hear it going over the edge, can't you? You can hear where the edge is.
Yeah, it doesn't. It makes a very different sound when it's up on top.
Yeah.
You hear it as it goes onto the edge. Now, I think that's pretty nicely polished. You just see that. It's that burr. Wow, that's amazing. Great big long chunk of burr coming off in one lump there. This is one of the things, because I've used diamond stone right at the beginning, I've taken back quite a lot of material, so this is why I'm getting these huge burrs. Now normally in the case of sharpening, I wouldn't go all the way back to those 200 grit diamond stones. Usually the 1200, the 2500 and then a bit of stropping off the leather would be enough. It's just because it's a new axe and I wanted to show you all of the process. But we've gone back that far. Right, I need some stropping compound now. So this is my kind of workshop, sorry, my work bag strop.
Yeah.
And because it's been sat in my box, it's got all sorts of nicks and marks and everything in it. If I'm being really serious about it, I bring out the workshop one, which is this lovely piece of thick leather belt without many marks in it. But normally when I'm out in the field, this is what I use. And a little bit of honing compound. This is Tormek paste. I like Tormek paste. I think it works well for me. You can use anything with polish. I know people use Autosol and things like that.
Yeah, I use a Darky Sharp, I think. That's
There's all sorts of different ways of doing it, and they're all equally valid. It's just, it tends to be preference, and I like Tormek paste. I have a Tormek at home, and I've used their paste for a long time to sharpen stuff.
I think sharpening is always one of those things where if somebody tells you there's only one way to do it, then it means that they
haven't got a clue,
or they're trying to sell you a way to do it.
Yeah, that's quite often the case.
As long as you can achieve the same thing and you can recognise when you've achieved it and achieve it consistently, then the technique you use doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter. I mean, I like this way of doing things, and the reason I show this way of doing things is because it's cheap. You know, how much are Japanese Waterstones now? They're kind of usually 30 quid for a grit, aren't they, or something like that? Yeah, that's
something, yeah.
I mean, I know there are cheaper ones on the market now than there were when I started out, but...
Oh, you can easily spend upwards of £100 on a set.
Yeah, but... So I don't really... I don't think that that's necessary.
So you're
too tight-fisted.
In order to maintain the angle on that blade, you're having to either drop or lift the heel of the axe, the bottom of the axe.
So, because I'm now moving the axe rather than the block, I could use the block as I was before. Just going round, kind of polishing the edge as we were before. But really, now we're stropping, we want to kind of change direction every pass. So it becomes a bit tedious to try and... So I tend to move over to doing it this way. So, to get the tip there, and then as we rotate around the blade, you can see that we've gone from there to follow the arc of the blade, and then to go back the other way, we're kind of doing the same thing, just in opposite movement.
It's important here to drag the blade rather than pushing it through the strop, isn't it?
Yeah, if you try and push through the strop, all you're going to do is create more of these lovely big nicks that I've got all over my strop from having it sat in the work bag. There are lots of people that say, well, you know, 50 passes like this, 100 passes like this, whatever. Really, all I'm doing is finishing it till I have a polished edge all the way along the edge. And you can see back here, you can still see the marks left by my diamond stones because I haven't got rid of them. But they come, as you come to the edge itself is nicely polished.
But for most woodworking, that's going to be, it's not going to affect the cutting or the blade, is it? Really?
No, I mean it's way back from the actual cutting edge now.
Yeah.
And because this leather gives, you don't just do the edge like this. You're doing kind of, oh no, almost halfway back that initial bevel. You know, so you are getting you get a lot more polished out with the strop at the end because you've got that give in the leather. And there we have a nice sharp axe. So really, what we should do now is we should get a shaving or something, just try and take some nice fine pieces off. There's lots of people use different ways of checking to see whether something's sharp or not. You know, they test with papers and people will shave their arms. I must admit I tend to do that a lot. I tend to see whether it's shaving sharp or not.
Yeah, with a bald patch on the left arm.
Yeah, I have got a
That's
bald
the
patch on
same
my
one
left arm,
home, yeah.
Always sharpen the same, always shave the same spot. One good way of doing it, just very lightly place it against your thumb or whatever nail. Do not put it on your flesh. If you put it on your nail and just drag it forward, you see, you just take a tiny, tiny little shaving. That tiny little shaving of your nail just tells you, it wants to bite into your nail.
Yeah.
It doesn't want to slide across. Okay, this is not something you want to push with.
No.
It's just a touch. And
see.
if you feel it kind of wanting to bite and to grab and stop, it's plenty sharp enough.
The way I always teach people is just, if you find from one of the offcuts of wood or something like that, if you can take a shaving off that's like a feather stick for fire lighting, then you're there.
Yeah, plenty good enough for any sharpening job. So there we have it. Have our nicely sharpened blade ready for use.